Hello and welcome back. It's been a while. Well, I could finally find some free time for you guys, so I got an interesting effect for you again. I'm gonna show you how you can lay over any object as an instance on your model and make sure that it is pointing all into its normal direction. Sounds easy, but it's not that easy. The geometry node setup is a little complicated, so I'm gonna show it to you quickly and I hope this helps. Let's get right into it. All right, so let's start with creating a cube, which we are going to use as a base model for our geometry node setup. I'm going to hide the one that I've already created, and I have imported a model that I'm going to use. Let's get into geometry nodes. I'm going to click on new. I'm going to disconnect the input from the output, and let's bring in both the models that we have here. Basically, this model is divided into two different sections. We've got joints and then we've got surface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use join geometry. Also make sure that whenever you're bringing in models, you always set it to relative, or else the original size of the model will come up, which is weird, and it will also not follow the animation that you have animated your model in. So I'm going to set both of these as relative. I'm going to join both of these into join geometry and plug this into the output. I want to add flowers to anything that is not a joint, right? So anything that has a body surface, I need to add a flower onto it randomly. Not everything should be a flower, right? So let's plug this in again, and I'm gonna keep this section separate because I'm not gonna do anything to it. We want to be able to distribute those flowers only on specific faces of this entire object. So in order to do that, the first thing I can do is I can add a mesh to point node, and I'll make sure I set this up to faces. You can select vertices or edges as well. It doesn't matter in this one, right? So once I plug this in, I get a bunch of points. All right, now that we have all of these points, let's instance our object, and I have created a model for the flower. It's a very simplistic model, and I've kept it as low poly as I could possibly do. Maybe we can remove a few more vertices. We're going to use this as something that I'm going to instance on my model. In order to do that, we're going to need an instance on point node, and I'm going to bring in my flower right here. I'm going to set it to original, and let's take the geometry and plug this into the instance. Now as soon as I do that, everything has become massive. We don't want this, so I gotta figure out a way to reduce the sizes of these flowers. One way I can do that is I can use a node called edge vertices, and I'm gonna bring this in. Now my system's working very slow, so let's just reduce the size for now to 0.1 for the entire flower. Bring this down. Now edge vertices, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the position of the first vertex and then calculate the distance to the vertex or vertices next to it, right? So let's bring in the distance node. Let's take the position of the second one, and then we are going to not plug it in directly, but use a capture attribute node. And since we are calculating the distance between two vertex, we're going to take this value and then we're going to plug this in right here, right? And since it's a vertex, we're going to use points instead of any other values like edges or faces. And then I'm going to take this value and plug it into the scale. Now as soon as I do that, it just dynamically changes the size of the flower basis of the size of the face or of the distance between the two vertex over there, right? It's not perfect, but it does a pretty good job and it looks dynamic enough, right? But if you see that there is another problem here, all the flowers are pointing upwards, which doesn't look good at all. One way to resolve this is that I can somehow figure out the normal of the points or the faces for the model, and then use that value to then define where the flowers can be pointed to, right? So I can use another capture attribute node here, and let's bring this in and change it to face and plug this in here. And then I'm going to bring a node called normal which is going to give me the normal for the faces of each of these objects. Now, if I'm going to take this and plug this into the rotation directly, it's not going to work. How do I fix that? Well, there is a node called align rotation to vector, right? So I'm going to use this and I'm going to duplicate this, and let's just plug in the rotation here. And let's take the normal and plug this in right here. Now, if I take this and plug it directly into rotation, so let's just plug this in. Now you can see that all the faces are aligned to the normal of that vector, right? But it doesn't look that pleasing because everything is of the same size, everything is rotating in the same direction. So there is no dynamic factor in this. So one way we can solve that is we can bring in a node called rotate instances. All right, rotate instances. I'm going to plug this in here. I can bring in a random value node and change it to vector and just plug this in. But if you see that this is a vector value versus this is a rotation value, so we can't really directly plug this in, because if we do, it's not going to work that well. There is another node that is called Euler to rotation, right? And we can bring this in and it changes the Euler value to rotation value, and we can plug this in right here. Now everything looks a little bit dynamic, but we are not there yet, right? So I can add a value of tau to the z-axis and minus tau to the maximum z-axis, or you can do vice versa, that's fine too. And then I can also add minus 0.5 and minus 0.5 to the x and y axis, and 0.5 to the positive x and y axis, right? And let's actually keep it standard, tau and minus tau. There we go. So now this looks a little bit more random, but all the flowers are at the same distance from the face of the model, right? And that's still giving it a little bit more rough look than what I want. So I can also take this random value and plug this into the pivot point. And as soon as I do that, if you see, the flowers are a little bit more distributed and are looking more pleasing on your model. There is another thing that I would like to do is that the size of these flowers are pretty similar when they are close to each other. Let's add a little bit more randomness to it too, right? So we're going to add a scale instance node here, and we're going to duplicate this, change it to a float value, and then plug this into the scale. And let's keep it not that distributed. Let's change it to 0.8. And again, you can play with this to whatever you think makes sense to your model. And you can also add a little bit more randomness by changing the seed to ID. I already had a shader applied to my flowers, so it is automatically doing that. But if you don't have it, you might need to create a shader for your flowers. If you see in my original model, the flowers were only showing up in specific places, not everywhere. Now, one way I did that was I took this normal value and I multiplied it with a noise texture, and we're gonna add a multiply node here and take the color value, not the normal one. And then once we have this, I went ahead and I used another capture attribute node, and I got another variable to play with, right? Now I took this variable and I said if it is greater than or equal to 0, then delete some geometry for me, right? So I'm gonna delete that geometry before I convert the faces into points. So let's add delete geometry node. Let's plug this in here. Let's plug this in here. Now it doesn't it doesn't work that well, and the reason behind that is I also used a color ramp right after my noise texture, and I changed it to ease. And let's bring this in. Let's see what happens. If you can see, now the flowers are only showing up in specific places and not everywhere. But again, where is the rest of the model? Well, there's a pretty easy way to fix it. So we can just duplicate the delete geometry node, and then I'm gonna take the output of the greater than or equal to node, and I'm gonna type not, and anything that is opposite to that will be saved, right? So let's take this, let's keep the model here, and let's plug this in here, and there we go. Our model is back. So the flowers would appear on the rest of the area, which is not equal to where the flowers are getting instanced. But I guess that's about it. That's how I created this, and I hope this video helped you and you learned something new today. If you did, please do like, share, and subscribe. And I'm gonna see you in the next one.